Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of the Brick by Brick podcast. We're excited this week. We have a special guest joining us who I'll introduce in just a moment. But we last week talked a lot about agency recruiting and some of the misconceptions and really just what it is we do every day. And we thought a good follow-up would be to talk a bit about the other side, the dark side, as we like to call it, and what that transition is like going from agency to internal, and what better way to have that discussion by actually having someone on who has done both things. And one person definitely popped to my mind pretty quickly when we came up with this. And thankfully she said yes. So please welcome Jenna DiLeo, who is a talent acquisition partner at Stream Companies. Jenna, thanks for being here.
Yes, thanks for having me. My very first pod debut, so I'm excited.
Very exciting. She's a TikTok star, so make sure you look her up after this. Just kidding, not really. Anyway, but Jenna, Chris and I were both fortunate enough to work with Jenna at our previous firm. She was on my team, and so we worked together pretty closely and have kept in touch. So really excited to chat with her today. And I think the best way to kick it off would be for you to share how you got into recruiting. What first drew you to this wonderful career of recruiting?
Yeah, so it was an interesting path to get here. I actually started my career in advertising at an ad agency or a couple different ad agencies. Did about 4 years in that space. And then a couple months before COVID hit, I decided I wanted to change. I just completely was like, you know what, I'm just going to change careers completely. So I ended up finding an opportunity as like a contract recruitment role for creative and marketing roles in the area. So it was something that I was like, all right, this is different in that it's recruiting, but it's also an area that I know, which is creative and marketing. So I kind of just took a leap of faith and had a contract role. COVID hit maybe 3-4 months later, which was really, really great.
Good
And
times.
I was lucky enough to kind of keep things moving in that job. And my first taste of recruiting was actually predominantly during a pandemic. So I had no choice but to really sink or swim, and I ended up really liking it. And then I started out not as a full desk recruiter, so working again on creative and marketing roles, and then made that shift into a full desk role. And yeah, then now I'm full circle in an advertising agency recruiting for them in-house. So
Love it.
it was a very full circle moment for me, and I'm definitely lucky to be where I'm at right now.
It is such a cool story that you started out in that world and you're back in it, but with all your recruiting skills. I love that.
Yeah.
So we talked a lot about misconceptions last week, and I think one big misconception or maybe negative view for internal recruiting is people see it as like a cop out or the easy way out, or people who can't cut it in the agency world. And I've definitely had that thought before, I will be honest, at one point in my career. But having worked with you, day to day, I saw how successful you were on the agency side, and were a top performer and a really crucial part of the team. And you chose to transition anyway. So talk about that decision and that misconception.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we've all kind of had that thought, I think, when you're an agency recruiter, just because it is really so different. But I don't think it's an easy way out necessarily, I think, or an easier path. I think, frankly, we have to stop comparing the two because they are so different. But at the end of the day, I really wanted to make a change into the internal side of things because I had different motivators. At that point in my life, I think we're all driven in each of our jobs, no matter what we're doing, by what are we motivated by? For me, I had just gotten married. My husband just, switched careers and became, fully involved in a commission role. So I personally didn't want to be in a commission role either. I am a control freak, and I kind of wanted to have a little bit more of a say, or, understanding of what I was going to be making, from a financial standpoint. Obviously, it's no secret that you can make a lot in an agency role. You have the commission factor, but for me, I think it was more about just making that stable change for me and my family. But also, I was never really a salesperson. I think, Sarah, you know that, but having worked with you, but like
I disagree.
I I tried it. I really did. And I was driven by it for a bit, but I think when I thought about it long term, I had to kind of look in the mirror and be like, you know what? I don't know if this is it. So I really wanted to get immersed into an organization more fully and contribute directly to them. I think ultimately it was just a different motivating factor for me. I wanted to kind of get more strategic and things like that. And I think that's like one of the big differences with internal versus agency. So that's kind of what I was motivated by at that point.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty simple. Like you said, agency recruiting is, you have to like sales, like to stay in
Yes.
that for your whole career. You can't grow if you don't want to grind it out in the sales world. And that's just is what it is. And I think that that's not, a sign of weakness or anything like that. I think it's just a different, like you said, motivating factor and a different interest.
Yeah.
Chris, anything to add, Curtis?
I guess I'm just curious. What did you like least about like the sales aspect of it? Because I mean, we're selling people, right? We're not like selling a product, but I get what you're
Yeah.
saying from certain, and I know it's not for everybody. So I was just curious, like what part of like the sales process did you not like?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, um, it was also more of like I loved the recruiting side a lot more than I loved the sales side. So I think that's where it became a little bit more glaring, where I was like, I just want to fill the roles. Like I don't necessarily want to, have my main focus be bringing them in all of the time. Again, I challenged myself and I was like all in on it, but at a certain point, like long term, I was like, I don't think I like this. Yes, it's a grind, 100%, but I think it was just like it's a lot of L's that you have to take to get, to the wins. And it can just get a little, discouraging sometimes. So you do have to have thick skin. I think I have thick skin in other areas, but when it comes to like the sales side of it, it was something that I didn't really want to like focus on long term. So
we talked about that also on our last call last week. We talked about how in agency life you take more L's, as you said, than W's, so it's like one of those things where you got to really prepare yourself, and you really don't know it until you're entrenched in it, right? And that takes a while, several months, sometimes almost a full 12 months before you really start to feel it. So I guess I had a question in terms of the differences between internal and external. I've never been an internal recruiter before, so I'm curious about, for you, what some of those big differences are. Instead of dealing with like external clients, you have internal clients, like different hiring managers and the profiles. But can you talk a little bit about that, what some of those differences are for you?
yeah. I will start by saying I think there's like more similarities than you think, in that recruiting is recruiting. Like at the end of the day, we have jobs to fill. So there's that like fundamental side of it that's similar. But I would say the biggest differences are, you obviously have way more of a direct line of communication to your hiring managers. It could be a Teams message, it could be a GIF, like, you know what I mean? It's things that are just, and we all know I love to communicate in GIFs. But no, I think it's just like you have that direct line a little bit more, and it's just more strategic. Like it's not just filling a role, it's also, okay, how are we also going to retain these people? Like I think that's kind of where the fall off tends to be, and stuff that's out of an agency recruiter's hands. You don't have any say on the retention and the training once they get here. So I kind of have more exposure to that side of things, being internal and working with our whole employee experience team to make sure that the people we are bringing in are well trained and retained at the end of the day. So I think those are like some big differences. And obviously, like firsthand, having the sense of the culture. Every single candidate asks, "What's the culture like? Tell me about the culture." So working here, I know a lot about it, and you can really just shed a lot of light on the ins and outs of the agency as a whole. So I'm experiencing all of that firsthand, which is obviously, you only get so much exposure being in an agency role.
Now, are you? I do have a question, like from the recruiting aspect of it, like on our end, right? Like we'll talk to candidates even when we don't have a job because we want to kind of get them in our pipeline for future opportunities. Do you typically do that internally, or is it more just like focused on that specific role and then?
It's a good question. I mean, I would say a little bit of both. I think that's like a agency recruiter thing that kind of carried over for me here, because it's like, well, okay, just because we filled it doesn't, like, we have the same types of roles here. I know I'm going to have an opening eventually. So pipelining is still important. But yeah, I think it's still something that I definitely like to do, but it's also like making sure I'm transparent with the candidates that, hey, we don't have anything right this second, but it could change in a week. So I think as long as you're transparent with people, like it's a healthy way to do it. So, but yes, I definitely do that still.
Do you feel like one thing we talked a lot about last time was how we have like so much market knowledge because we are talking to all different candidates in different industries, different clients. Do you feel like that has been, like, as a partner to your internal team, hiring managers rather, that's been a value add for you to sort of bring, some of that market knowledge to help guide them in like compensation and, position titling and just how to attract talent? Because I feel like if you haven't been on the agency side, you might not have as much of that exposure to just see like the way things can go sideways when you are working with so many different clients. Like,
Yep.
how has that helped you help your internal hiring managers, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's helped a lot. And I think just from my advertising agency experience, like if that's what you're referring to as well, we have a different naming convention here for a lot of our roles than other agencies, ad agencies. So to me, I know, like I can kind of manipulate job titles a little bit when we're posting them to make sure we're attracting the right people because I naturally have that background having worked in these jobs before. So, but yeah, I think that it's definitely helped. And then also, keeping a pulse on the market, I think is really important. Like the compensation side of things, I mean, you guys probably know it as well. It is drastically different than it was like 3 years ago, I feel like in some cases. So yeah, I mean, that's something that like I always try to keep a pulse on with them and feel like just with that background that I've had in the past, I feel confident in, showcasing, hey, this is what's out there and here's how it's changed even since, I was in a similar type of role a couple years ago.
Yeah, that's a good point. And in terms of going back to like the misconception we touched on a bit, I think for me, I feel like years ago, when I was naive and would think like, oh, going internal, like in my mind, it was like kicking your feet up on the desk and just like letting the candidates roll in and it's super chill and like not stressful at all. And obviously, you and I have talked about this and just have kept in touch. But for those who, again, I've also never been internal, so I have literally zero idea whether that's true or not. And obviously now I know that it's not. But what are those different pressures like? Like, how are you handling different stress levels and what are the different like milestones you have to hit? Because it's not like you're not competing against anybody else to get talent, but there still is pressure, but it's just different.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a great topic, I think, because one, every internal, every company is different, whether you have a recruitment arm or you don't. And I think that like I certainly am not sitting here kicking my feet up every day and being like, all right, applicants, like what do we have today? There's so much a part of this job that I didn't even think I would have exposure to yet. that I've only been here a year and a half, and I'm like, oh wow, this is like, there's a lot of elements to it. I'm not just a recruiter. I think that the big things that I've had exposure to are, again, the retention side of things, the strategy, but also there's a lot that goes into like building those relationships. Like you still need to build the trust. You're not going to come in on day one and be like, hey, you've never met me. I'm going to recruit on a job that's really important to you and your day to day. Trust everything that comes out of my mouth. Like it's just not going to work. So it takes time. But I think like I also have a lot of exposure to executives in the company of, hey, let's talk about your hiring needs for the quarter, mapping that out, resource planning, making sure we are properly staffed to fill these roles. Like, there's so many elements to it that I think are overlooked and seen as like, oh, just because I see so many applicants that are warm leads, essentially, that are getting, right into our ATS, I still have to go through these applicants. I still have to make sure that like our managers aren't going through them every single day. And that's my job. So, there's a lot that goes into it, and it's different pressure in that like you still have to fill the job and you still want to make sure you have the right people, but you don't financially depend on it. And I think that is a relief to me, but it's also a thrill of the agency side of it, which I get, but it's just different pressures. It's just not the same.
Was it hard to get like buy-in or like feel like being valued by the hiring managers? I think of like on our side, I feel like a lot of times they think we just have all these candidates at our disposal and like send me resumes, but like don't really value, us a lot. They just think we're just going to throw them resumes and be able to get them people and not take the time to really talk to us about the roles and what you're seeing in the market and comp and all that stuff. I mean, was that a difficult process? I mean, I've talked to a couple of other people that have done the internal side, and I think that's like, the hardest part, because you can't fire an internal like hiring manager, right? If we have a client that's being difficult or like not realistic, like we could just choose not to work with them. Obviously, being internal, you can't really do that.
There's no hiding. Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. I think like it takes time to build up that trust, and like ultimately it's our job to make sure that we're presenting that information to them. Like if we're not telling them, hey, your expectations are completely, in terms of comp, like, come on, let's take a look at this. Like, these are the types of candidates we'll get for this price. And just really, understanding that, hey, this isn't their focus day to day. They're not keeping a pulse necessarily on the market and talking to people every day like we are. So it's our job to make sure that we present it. But yeah, it's certainly a challenge, because it's also like, well, this is how we pay people because, this is what it's just been for the last several years. But trying to have them think differently, that times are changing, the world is a different place, and making sure that we're, bringing that to light.
Yeah.
I have a question. So from the agency side, we have KPIs and we have metrics and goals that we have to hit, right?
Oh, yeah.
So how is success measured from an internal perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think retention is a big part of it. The people that we bring in, were they good hires? Again, you know what I mean? Like, and if it's something, we always really try to dig in on where did we go wrong if someone left a year or less, was it something that we did? Did we not set them up for success somehow? Digging into that. Or was it just simply, not a good fit? I think that retention is a big part of it. But honestly, like that's the biggest one I can think of. I mean, it's something I'm still figuring out a little bit, to be honest with you, because it is like I'm still a little new to it. But I think retention is certainly like a big part, and digging into why we lose people, or why they're staying. Kind of there's a lot. I feel like there's a lot to unpack there, but like that's the part that we're still kind of figuring out day to day.
Yeah.
Is there anything you miss about the agency side?
Besides us.
Oh yeah, besides you guys. Well, I mean, the camaraderie was
No.
certainly a big thing. I mean, like our team was great. You know, I think you're in the trenches, like with people. I think that's a huge part about it. But the thrill, the chase, you know, I think that's what kind of keeps you guys going a lot too. It's just I'm a competitive person. Like I grew up playing sports. I like, it's an adrenaline thing. When you get that like offer and they are accepting and it's like, you're just thrilled, you're pumped. So here it's like it's a different type of win. Like I'm still really happy that we filled the job. I'm still really happy. But like at the end of the day, I know I'm going to fill the job. This is my job to fill. So I think kind of like that thrill and that chase of like those wins, obviously that's a fun part of it. But other than that, I'm happy. I'm happy with where I'm at.
You're like,
that,
no going
nothing.
back.
Yeah, I got nothing. No, it was a great experience. I mean, I'm so happy I did it, at 2 different places and experienced it. But again, long term, it was just not for me.
Now, you are internal now. I'm sure you get messages like from like old version of yourself. What is that like being like the one in other people's sales cadence, like for recruiters?
So it's when I first got here, I was like, oh, this feels so great. Like that's when I want to kick my feet up on the desk and be like, all right, recruiters, like, bombard my inbox. But no, it is a lot. I think I have like I understand why some people don't respond, to the agency recruiters because you get so many, it's a lot in addition to candidates that are messaging you directly on LinkedIn. So, yeah, it's definitely a lot, but it's, I also
Do you feel like
understand
you're
the
in like
struggle.
a position of power? Like, does it feel powerful?
Well, it feels powerful for a minute, but then I'm like, but I was you, and I'm not going to be like this. So, try to give him a response, but thanks, but no thanks.
Now,
Yeah.
I know you have like built a small team internally, but I'm curious, like now that you have seen both sides, and even though you might not have needed this yet, what would you have done differently on the agency side when prospecting? Like knowing now what you know about what type of value add supplement could be in terms of like recruiting support. Are there things or even like, I don't know, in some of the messages you've gotten that have stood out more to you or like just information you have now that would change your way of doing sales in the past?
Yeah. Great question. I think I laugh at the times that I get messages where I'm like, I've sent that same message 1,000 times. So naturally I'm just like, come on, man, like give me something fresh, give me something new. But no, I think
You only respond to gifts.
Yes, send me gifts. Anyone that wants our business, send me gifts. No. I think the biggest thing that I've learned is, well, first off, let me back up. The value of external agencies is certainly a thing. I think it really just depends on, the business need. You know what I mean? Like we are a growing advertising agency. We're hiring, 100 plus people year over year. So it doesn't make sense for us like to hire externally right now. It's not cost effective, right? But like I think at the end of the day, like it's just if you can maybe think, okay, what does the recruiter that's in there, like what do I need? What can I help you with? Versus I have a candidate and I know I can fill this role. I'm sure you can fill the role. I don't feel like you can't, but like it's really a time and place thing, I feel like.
Yeah.
If someone reaches out to me and we are absolutely bombarded, but we can't bring somebody else on, as another resource and we have a very niche role that we need, who know, like who knows, maybe it will work. But I think understanding the recruiter and the TA team as a whole to be like, what does your workload look like? How many recruiters do you have? What is, how many recs are you managing? And kind of understanding like what their role is and what their struggles are versus I can fill the job and here's 10 candidates ready to go, even though I don't know anything about the job. You know what I mean? So I think that's just like a different approach that I think could work to kind of cater it more toward the TA team versus like I can fill this. I have somebody, if that makes sense. It's tricky.
No, that makes complete sense. It makes it less transactional and more
Exactly.
of a strategic partnership. No,
Exactly.
that's a great piece of advice.
Yeah.
I also feel like a lot of times when I have reached out or like talked to internal TA people, it's a lot of times like, yeah, I get what you're doing. Like I was on the agency side
I was there.
too. Like eye roll. Like, okay. Um, so I guess like if you were to talk to someone who is in the agency side and maybe thinking about, do I want to go internal? Who's never been, obviously. Because I do think it is hard to imagine, like if you're questioning that, not having any of the outside knowledge. What are some things you would, I guess, like pieces of advice in terms of the fear of transitioning and feeling like, you know, you're not going to be as engaged or making as big of an impact, or like what would you say, I guess, to that person?
Yeah, I think the first step is, what do you want out of this? Like, I think if you're really driven by sales and the chase and all of that, then yeah, it's probably not for you. But if you are somebody that wants to be more immersed into something and have an impact on like a singular organization and really digging into it, I think that, I'm just thinking back to my time when I was trying to make this switch. Like I was like, I want more. Like I want to have more involvement with one thing. So I feel like that's the first step, is like, what do you want? What do what's that goal for you? And then, kind of just taking the leap of faith, like knowing that it's going to be different. But
Mm-hmm.
if at the end of the day, you want to get exposed to more things, I think that's just naturally going to come. And I felt so energized like when I got here, because I was like, there's so much that I want to touch. There's so much that I want to do. And I think that like opened up a completely new door, but I also knew that it was in there. I think it was just like kind of having that moment with yourself of like, what is it that you're trying to get out of it next? I know that sounds
Yeah.
very deep, but like, I think that's a huge part of it when you're looking to make a new change in general, no matter,
Yeah.
what it is. So,
Well, I think too, like when you leave agency, if you've been there long enough, like you put a lot of effort into building your book of business
yeah.
and your pipeline. So it is scary to think about doing something different, because it's almost as if was all like I did all that work and now I'm just walking away from it, and there's going to be nothing from that I can take with me. But I actually, again, like some of the things we talked about last week, you have a lot more exposure to things outside of just recruiting or just sales than you think when
Yeah.
you really look at like what you do in a TA role internally. That can be really applicable, I think.
Mhm.
Like, so I think I think people hesitate when they see these TA roles, because there's a lot on there around like internal strategies and processes and things, and it can feel intimidating. But I also feel like sometimes when we work with clients that don't have TA teams, like we are helping with that. It's just not, you know, with our employer. Sometimes it's our clients that we're advising. And I
Mhm.
think just thinking outside the box a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot of process that is involved that I think we're like knee deep in that right now. Like again, we're a growing org, so we're constantly trying to think, okay, how can we make sure that our teams know exactly what needs to be done in terms of the hiring process and all of these other things. So to me, it's an exciting part right now, because you know this is a place where it is fast, even though it's internal. So I think I got lucky with like making that shift from like, staffing agency to ad agency, because ad agencies are nuts too, an agency,
Yeah.
there's so much that goes on every day. So it's like, all right, but how can we reel it in? How can we make processes and, just continue to build off of it, which I have found a love for, surprisingly.
Love that. Anything else to add, Chris, Curtis? Thoughts?
No, this is awesome. I really appreciate it. Like I said, I've never been in an internal position. So, and I mean, everybody who's been in agency long enough has thought about it at least once or twice in your career. But I think to Sarah's point before, I had that prideful feeling like, I've been doing this for so long. I'm just gonna walk away from everything that I built and all my clients, and like it's too much pride in me to be like, no, I'm gonna stick this out forever because I'm too far gone at this point. But I think it's really interesting that anyone that's watching this that has thought about it or currently thinking about it, to kind of hear both sides, right? Like, hey, your feelings are valid. Agency side is a crazy place, and I think there's always this misconception about moving. We call it the dark side, right? Like going internal, like you're giving up and you're going in the other direction. But I think it's also valid. Like there are many people that have done agency, tried it, and same thing, kind of found that it just was not for them and wanted to do something different. So I think this will be a really insightful conversation for other people to hear, for sure.
And I do think, oh, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, I mean, I think you kind of hit it on the head at the beginning when you said what your motivations are. Like, if your heart's not 100% into like the agency side, I mean, it's already hard enough, like dealing with all the rejection and like, it's really going to be hard for you to be successful. So, I mean, I think it's a great piece of advice. Like, you figure out what your motivations are, and a lot of people get in the agency side because obviously, you can make a lot more money because it is commission driven, but there also are perks of working internally and the things that you said that you were looking for, and at this point in your life. I mean, I think it was good for you to kind of make that transition.
Yeah. I was going to say, when you in the beginning, this like almost animosity between like agency and internal, and like when people move on, there's like the comments of, agency's not for everyone. Like, well, it's not. And that's not a bad thing. Like, it doesn't mean they're not good at what they do. And you're one of, a few people who have left and moved on internal who were really great at the job. Like, we're killing it at the job. And the majority of the folks I know that I've worked with who went internal, like more than not, have carved out really great careers in talent acquisition, in-house. And so, I don't know, I do feel like there's like this shame or like this weird, negative connotation of, agency's not for them. Like, okay, that's okay.
Yeah. And it is. And that's why I wanted to talk about it. And I think it's important, especially having been on both sides of it. But, again, it's not for everybody, but it doesn't need to be a negative thing. Like, it doesn't need to be like, oh, it's an easy out because, you're not tied to commission or you're not tied to a bunch of different things that are really hard about agency recruiting. Like, there's so many other challenges internally that you have to deal with that, it's not a cakewalk. And I think that that's the biggest thing is it's just like, what do you want? What are you motivated by? And that's how you should decide. And I mean, I think like, again, recruiting is recruiting. Like, you're either good at it or you're not. But, at the end of the day, it's just like, what really drives you and what's best for you. And, that's what's really important. But it's funny that you say that though, because like when I'm talking to candidates now, when I'm interviewing them for our advertising agency, I even say agency isn't for everyone. You know what I mean? It's two different agencies that we're talking about, but like it's similar because, if you're in-house in a marketing role and then you go and you're servicing the one account in your marketing, your employer, but then you go to an advertising agency and you have 50 clients with, it's some people just don't thrive in that environment, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just like, you have to cater to your strengths at the end of the day. And it doesn't make you any less of a recruiter if you're internal or in an agency, you have jobs to fill, and that's how you should be measured.
Mic drop.
Yeah, you're dropping gems over here, Jenna.
Yeah, I'm just getting started. We're
we'll have part 2 next now.
Well, this is awesome. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for
being thanks, Jenna.
First ever Brick by Brick guest. So you get the first honor. Thank you so much for
thank you
joining us. And I'm sure we'll find a reason to have you back soon.
Yeah, I mean, I'm down. This is fun.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
See ya.
Yeah.